Ireland has the opportunity to acquire lots of firms from the UK as the UK hard Brexit and its removal from the customs union becomes a reality. England's disadvantage is Ireland's opportunity, and you have to keep saying that to yourself right now. But if we do not have the groundwork done already, if we don't have the possibility of even accommodating these new employees and these new firms, well, then we're going to lose even before we start. So there's going to be an awful lot of basic work that will have to be done here in Dublin to ensure a smooth transition into a post-Brexit world. Britain is going to be leaving the customs union. That is going to be the single most traumatic event for the Irish economy in the 21st century. On top of that, they're talking about introducing a 17% rate of tax. Already, Ireland's policy of a tax-based industrial attraction is not going to be sustainable. Not only is the UK thinking about moving to a 17% rate of tax, the United States, under Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross, has already announced a desire to move to a 15% rate of corporate tax. That level of tax competition will make it deeply difficult for Ireland to sustain the number of businesses that it has located here in the future. And if there are further changes made by the European Union with respect to the common consolidated corporate tax base, we could see the income from pharmaceutical activities in Ireland, the revenues going to the Department of Finance, reduced by 40%. So we have to start thinking. We have to think radically. Firms that have survived the crisis are the firms that are research active and firms that are heavily engaged with high human capital. That's the future. And that's how we will survive Brexit and how we will survive the economic consequences of Mr. Trump.
We're a trading nation. You know, Theresa May talks about the UK or England becoming the Singapore of the North Sea. The reality is that Ireland is already the Singapore of the North Sea, although without perhaps the repressive social structures that Singapore is sometimes criticised for. There's lots of forecasts that come out, accepting the Andy Haldane sackcloth and ashes moment. We should, of course, remember that we can't predict what happens after Brexit because it hasn't happened. And, you know, it was surprising to me, to be honest, that Andrew Haldane, as chief economist of the Bank of England, would say, oh, we got it all wrong, when the Bank of England took aggressive and immediate steps and was criticised by the hard Brexiteers for doing so to actually mitigate the effect of the shock in the markets immediately afterwards. They did exactly what a central bank should do. So we don't know what the effects of Brexit are, although every day they look more and more calamitous for the UK, I have to say. But there's no doubt about it that from every perspective, Brexit is a bad thing. Doesn't mean that everything about Brexit is bad. As Charles has mentioned, and we are indeed in strange times when Charlie Larkin is channeling Fenian slogans. England's difficulty is Ireland's opportunity. I expect to see him out in a cocked hat with a Mauser soon on the steps of the GPO. But there are threats and there are opportunities from Brexit. But Brexit is an incredibly destabilising thing for the Irish economy. It is interesting looking at the reactions of the media, social and mainstream, and commentators on Brexit, because it's forcing us to think about where our place is in the world. And for many, many years, because of the cultural affinities we have with the UK, many of us here have worked in the UK. Many of us here have family in the UK. It's just next door. Lovely neighbours, please stay over your own fence. That's the Irish attitude towards the UK. And it works. But that doesn't mean that we necessarily have to be part of, other than through sheer accident of geography, a part only of the Anglo economic sphere. We are and have been historically part of the European economy. I come from the southwest of Kerry, where Daniel O'Connell came from. And accepting the issue about smuggling, we'll just leave that aside. Trade from Smerwick Harbour, from Derrynane, from Kenmare, wasn't to London, wasn't to Bristol. It was to La Coruña, it was to Bordeaux, areas where there's nice food and drink. It was to the continent of Europe. And the continent of Europe has long and historically been as much an important part of the Irish psychology as has been the UK. We are, bizarrely, given where we are, an island off an island, we are in the centre of both the UK and the continental spheres. And we must remind ourselves constantly of that. This is from Morgan Stanley yesterday, and probably out of date already. They see a not insignificant 25% chance that the UK will crash in a disorderly fashion into a World Trade Organization tariff situation. Now, it's only dawning in the UK today and yesterday just what that means. Among other things, it means that any country can take any case at any level against any part of the UK economy and tie it up in knots for years. So yeah, you can get a fast free trade agreement, but you can't necessarily get a fast and fair free trade agreement. From the Irish perspective, this is important. And yet, we export about 14% of our exports to the UK. We export more to Belgium. So when people say, oh, we don't want to cut off our major trading partners, say, but we're not. We're still going to trade with the Belgians. So the UK is important, but it's not predominant and it's not preeminent. It's important for us in terms of imports, which is quite interesting. I was trying, but I failed miserably last night to negotiate my way through the WTO's tariff database to find out, what would be the tariff on a magazine. When you go to buy Hello magazine, there's going to be a tariff on it. When you try and buy a service, you're out in business. Look at your procurement chains and see what extent you're tied into the UK versus other places, because the chances are not insignificant those supply chains will be disrupted. And I'm going to come to that in a moment. So Brexit has a major impact, but this is very sectorally granular. We need to be conscious of the fact that Ireland is not an undifferentiated economy. It's quite worrying sometimes listening to UK commentators. They basically seem to say, sure, Paddy will still sell us the spuds. That was almost directly what was said yesterday by a pretty respected UK commentator on Morning Ireland. We still will need access to the cheap agricultural products from Ireland. Okay, well that's fine, and we'll sell you the spuds, but we'll also try and sell you software and services. And if that's your attitude, well, you need to think again. We need to put ourselves forward in these areas as being an economy and a society that can, like the business school, be born globals. We have probably 60% in some of our MSc programs of students from outside of Ireland, the majority of whom are from the continent of Europe, from outside the European Economic Area. And that's not unusual in globally traded knowledge-intensive services. That's where we need to be. We see in the salary survey that the people who are responding, both on the companies and on the employer sense, are very, very open. And that's exactly as it should be. Bilateral trade flows between Ireland and the UK could reduce by as much as 20%. This is, for me, the biggest danger. 85% of our energy product imports come from the UK. We are very heavily dependent on carbon, and we're very heavily dependent on one source of carbon. We need to start thinking about that issue. But for those who are indigenously manufacturing, and for those who are in the agribusiness in particular, Brexit is a huge existential problem, but it should be seen as a huge existential opportunity to start moving our export orientation away from the UK towards the greater world. This is the global supply chain for Starbucks. Global supply chains are global. We all remember what happened when a small Icelandic unpronounceable volcano exploded in 2010. Whole thing ground to a damned halt. And we had situations where Intel and other companies were thinking about how can we get our products out. You've got chips being manufactured in Neekslip that go into computers in Lesotho. Get your head around that. I collaborate every day with co-authors in North Carolina and in Australia, my two most frequent co-authors. We do that through the internet. But that's a global trade in knowledge. And every one of you have dealings in your businesses, in physical or services, with people around the world. And if global supply chains get disrupted, then we have a problem. And we have a plan for deliberate disruption. This is a unique thing in the world. We have a plan for deliberate disruption of supply chains. Maybe unconscious or semi-conscious or, whatever, with Donald. But in a deliberate and desired disruption of global supply chains, European supply chains from Brexit. Here's the problem. The people we think of as poor, the lower middle classes, the working classes, the people on welfare in the Western world, who are still in the top 75 and 80 percentile of global income and wealth, have seen perhaps falls, more likely stagnation. So it's a relativistic approach. We're seeing ourselves standing still while the rest of the world accelerates forward. And that's causing terrible existential angst. But the reality is, we are and remain wealthy. Ireland is and remains a global open trading economy. We will be able to weather Brexit, especially if we realise that it's one of our partners, but not the big partner, and that we have a much bigger pool in the world and a much bigger pool in the European economy. It's an opportunity, it's a threat. The salary survey and the economic analysis underlying it, the fact that we are a knowledge economy, that we have world-class universities. Every one of our universities is in the top 5% in the world. That we are all knowledge specialists is the way we will get through this and we will prosper. Thank you very much.